Chatswood RSL Club is on the hunt for a development partner to build an A-grade office tower in Sydney's Lower North Shore. With an approval in place for an 18-storey tower of over 35,000 square metres, the club has enlisted a team of advisors to help oversee the search. Joining us to unpack the opportunity is Endeavour Property Advisory's Managing Director, Andrew Gibbons. Thanks for joining us on The Urban Developer.
Pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me along.
Now, Endeavour, along with JLL, has been tasked with finding a development partner on behalf of the RSL. What's the brief you've been given and what are they looking for in a partner?
Yeah, that's great. It's an important question. Well, in a partner, they're really looking for somebody that's got a development background experience in producing commercial office, attracting the tenants with that, because as we know, the tenants are the funding and help the success of that project. And also, and importantly, working with the landholder, the RSL, who will be built back into that process. And our brief is to ensure that we get the right parties who have that characteristics that we can then unlock the land value for the RSL.
And so what is the actual opportunity? What's the development play here? What's the project? How does it fit into the current market cycle?
Yeah, well, let me take a step back, and the RSL the board of directors were quite strategic in what they decided, and that was to get some advice. We were appointed to be that property advisor, and we identified fairly early that this site was a very significant site, probably one of the largest sites in Chatswood, 42 steps from the railway, and we were able to increase the FSR from 5 to 1 to 10.5 to 1. But one thing that we talked to the RSL was we had to get a number of elements de-risked. So you couldn't bring it to market without de-risking the FSR, overshadowing, site isolation. Those were the key risks. And through a concept DA approved late last year, we were able to do that, giving certainty to a development partner of what they could actually do. Now, they will have to lodge a stage 2 DA, and that will be detailed design, and that'll be important. And since that approval came through, we've actually been doing a fair bit of work with our leasing agents, Rachel and Steph from CBs and Paul from JLL, to really understand what's happening in the commercial market. So the market will be, I think, very attracted to this because the feedback we're getting, as evidenced in One Denison, that fantastic project done by Winton, we're seeing a flight to quality and a flight to the metro, getting record rents and fantastic tenants with healthy building initiatives, environmental initiatives, and post-COVID ability to do services and touchless and things like that. So very strong offer, our belief.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously the office building is 18 stories. It's approved now in terms of a concept. The RSL is an important participant in all of this. How will the RSL incorporate back into the development? And are there any other special requirements to kind of give back?
Yeah, that's really important. Well, the RSL, like many landowners that are non-for-profits, they're very asset rich, and they have good cash flows, but they can't afford $190 million construction cost, as you can imagine. And so what they're trying to do is to try to unlock that with a development partner that can actually, or has that experience, particularly in commercial. We certainly didn't want to be seen as the cutting edge, latest commercial IP from global research. That's what your majors out there are doing. Your Lendleases, your Stocklands, your Dexuses, some of those big industry players out there. You've seen that with what, again, referencing the Denison, which is really the benchmark project on the North Shore, what they've been able to achieve. So, that's what we've been trying to achieve for the club, to unlock that value in getting that right IP along. And the development partner will provide the club the built form and the fit out, and then in one stratum. And then the other stratum will be the commercial tower, which the development partner will keep as a long-term investment.
It's really interesting because, and you mentioned it there, but we've seen it more broadly around the country as this trend of RSLs and other clubs, as you say, that are asset rich, looking to partner with the private sector, private developers to really leverage the value of their asset and portfolios. What do you reckon is driving this more broadly? Is it these groups becoming a little bit more aware of what their underlying, asset values are, or do you think there's something bigger at play around demographics and the changing nature of what these clubs actually are?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm not sure I've got all of the answers, but certainly for part of those answers, we've seen a lot of urban renewal. And you've seen groups like Goodman who have benefited from urban renewal on the industrial sense, where they've had some major sites that were located in an area that are now getting repositioned for mixed use or retail or even residential. The same has happened with these clubs and some of the non-for-profits like churches and so forth, where they've had traditional land holdings, generally of quite some significant size. And as urban growth has occurred, particularly in town centres, rezonings have happened and changes in board have happened. And people like us, property advisory firms, are getting called on more often to say, look, we've got an issue around corporate governance, and how do we protect our members? How do we add value for the long term to be able to unlock that and make the most of this asset, which is a one-off opportunity in many cases.
And will ultimately set them up for generations to come into the future, and perhaps even get them off the pokies in time as well. Now, talk about the deal. Like, what types of partnerships are being considered by the RSL, and are there some that are more favourable than others in terms of structures? Take us through how one would cut the deal.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. One of the things that we wanted to ensure this expressions of interest program was able to uncover is the many different structures that are out there. So, there are some traditional structures. A lot will depend on how those structures affect the risk for the client, the RSL, in their land holding, and what is delivered for them. So we're really keen to hear from the market what those structures are before we could commit to a response. And the other really significant thing that we've seen is the build to rent, which has come in post us getting this DA approval, allowed in B3 core and B4 core, where it's a totally different institutional style of asset for residential that is a new player. So we don't really know what some of the build to rent opportunities are for this site, but we're hoping some counterparties will be able to guide us, and we can consider them against other proponents who are looking at more of the traditional commercial and club, which is what the DA reflects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it is open to build to rent operators under the current zoning, and no doubt you'll have some interest. It's been fairly buoyant in the last 12 months in terms of that. Now, in terms of capabilities, track record, financial capacity of the groups that are throwing their hat in the ring, what's required to be considered as part of this submission process?
Well, Adam, I mentioned a figure previously, and that was a construction figure. We had the Altus QS team do for us based on the DA that we've achieved, and it's around about 190 mil construction costs. So we're looking obviously for a well capitalised partner that has experience in constructing and funding these styles of developments. That's really important. And if we're talking about the commercial component, less so for the build to rent, because build to rent doesn't require pre-commitment, which is a significant advantage to the build to rent offer. But in commercial, the pre-commitment will often define the financing of a project. And so having that track record and those tenant relationships is really important in our belief as part of the criteria. So that, the capital, track record, and the ability to work in this structure, which will be a stratum for the club and a stratum for the office tower. So those are the sorts of things that we'll take into account, along with obviously the pricing and some of the other terms and conditions.
Can't forget about that. Now, what's the process for selecting and then ultimately deciding upon this partner? Is there a timeline for this?
Yes, there is. We have a close tomorrow week, in fact, of the expressions of interest. That'll be our first view of what the market is saying to us about their interest in the site. We have to say we've got a due diligence box, and that's been very heavily visited by a number of the major parties you would expect in Australia and some international as well. So we're actually very thrilled. The JLL sales team, headed by Simon and Luke, they were very impressed with the amount of interest they've had across the board for this project. And they do a lot of national business. So we're really encouraged, and we're really excited to see what's going to happen. And then once we assess those risks, not just the pricing, but also commercial terms around tax, around structuring, a risk to the club about the transfer of that land and when that occurs, they're the sorts of things that we'll be taking into account, and then going back to parties that will really meet the least risk and the best pricing and the best track record. So we'll go back to those parties and start to further negotiations with a view really before the end of this year to have chosen a successful development partner for the site.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like a cracking opportunity. We look forward to watching who ultimately gets in there and is successful. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, no problems, Adam. And just one other thing that you might want to consider, and this is a fact that's being raised by many. A lot of the CEOs I'm speaking to out there at the moment are talking about one thing for their success of their organisation, and that is the attraction and retention of top quality staff. And that's a big consideration for developers nowadays, particularly in a post-COVID environment. And things like the Chatswood amenities, the 2 major shopping centres, the Bupa, the Services New South Wales, the HCF, the restaurants, the pubs, they're all elements that are going to be helping, along with the built form and design, that element which is the heartblood of so many different companies around the country. But an interesting fact nonetheless.
Very good. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam.